Sandy. 5 years ago, we were handed the news, you have cancer, and it will not go away. We cried, we hugged, and we looked each other in the eyes and said, no, we will not let this alter who we are, and we will not give up, ever. The news was devastating, but then you stood tall and gathered all of us together and told us we are going to beat this. We will not let this get in the way of who we are and how we live. You have been the pillar in our lives, and while we all sometimes sit and cry, you will cry with us, but then you say, we got this. I've read a lot of prayers and quotes that our dear family and friends have provided for this book. I thought to myself, what can I say? What words can I provide? And what are words going to do? Well, sweetie, if all they can do is offer you some comfort when you are snuggled up at night, trying your best to fend off the evils of the horrific treatments you must endure, then the words are worth something. So, it is 5 years later. We have been married nearly 6 years now. I have had the fortune of being married to a wonderful, spectacular person and probably the best mother I've ever met. We have loved, we have laughed, and we have made some great friends who are there for us anytime we need them, and we have had some wonderful times traveling with them. We have seen Allison, Kelly, and Lauren grow up to become beautiful, loving, and most of all happy people who love God the way that we do. We have been truly blessed with 2 spectacular grandchildren who love their Gigi, and I think Papa too. What lies ahead for us? Who knows? But as we play out those words God sent to us 5 years ago, we keep those close to our heart and in the front of all of our thoughts. Today is the day. Here's to the next 5 years, more laughs, more smiles, more hugs, more grandchildren, and most important of all, more of you with me. By the way, if Chris and Ryan read this, how about some grandkids from your side? I love you more than I can ever express in words, but let the words comfort you if at all possible. Know that my heart and my mind are always occupied with your smile. Know that while I constantly worry, I still thank God every day for another day with you. I am and will continue to be strong for you and with you. We got this, babe. With all my heart, soul, and love, Rick.
Wow. I wanted... He is a great writer. How am I supposed to follow that? Gosh. Every day, Sandy read this devotional, and I felt like I wanted to read, as we say, just a short-term goodbye. We'll see her again. But I wanted to read today's little reading. Wait a second. What is today? Okay. It messed up. Okay. So today is the day. Seek my face, and you will find more than you ever dreamed possible. Let me displace worry at the center of your being. I am like a supersaturated cloud showering peace into the pool of your mind. My nature is to bless. Your nature is to receive with thanksgiving. This is a true fit designed before the foundation of the world. Glorify me by receiving my blessings gratefully. I am the goal of all your searching. When you seek me, you find me and are satisfied. When lesser goals capture your attention, I fade into the background of your life. I'm still there, watching and waiting, but you function as if you were alone. Actually, my light shines on your every situation that you will ever face. Live radiantly by expanding your focus to include me in all your moments. Let nothing dampen your search for me. Sandy included our God in all of her moments. Nothing dampened her search. And I wanted to, I was going to do a public apology for all the sisterly things I did when we were growing up. I guess that I won't go there. I'm sorry. But I wanted to say that clearly, as evidenced by the visitations here today and all of the people, that Sandy was a collector of people. She was awesome. So you touched her lives. I don't want you all to forget that you touched her too. She felt that deeply, and I think that it was just awesome. I was thrilled by her friends and her church, and I just am so glad you are all and are part of her collection. And I just am grateful, the family is grateful for all your support and love and for loving our girl. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. Sandy was born January 10th, 1960. And she went home to be with God on January 16th, 2015. She grew up in Brentwood, attended St. Mary Magdalene School, and graduated from Brentwood High School. Sandy fought long and hard against cancer. And after more than a 5-year fight, she chose to no longer battle cancer. Instead, she chose to defeat cancer through the way she lived and loved. She was a friend to many and a stranger to none. Sandy was loved and will be deeply missed by her husband, daughter, sisters, mother, family, friends. Sandy was a member of the Gathering United Methodist Church and loved her church and her Lord. In her lifetime, she spent several years working at EDS, Enterprise, Rent-A-Car, and lastly, Scottrade. And in her career was considered to be an outstanding and beloved IT manager. Philip James Bailey, the 19th century poet, once wrote these words. He said, "It matters not how long we live, but how." Now, some of us in this room might disagree. How long matters. We wish that we still had Sandy here with us. But Bailey was right in this regard, that how we live matters more. Friends, we're gathered here today for 3 reasons. One is to celebrate. To celebrate the life of an amazing woman who's worthy of our celebration. The second is to grieve. To acknowledge and not sugarcoat that we sit here today with a profound sense of loss and sadness. And the third reason is to hope. To hope because of the gospel that Sandy so rigorously believed in and so faithfully preached with her life. But first we have to celebrate. I first met Sandy November 15th, 2009. I know that date because we had since talked about it quite a bit. It was the first weekend after she received the final name, the diagnosis for what was going on in her life. And she decided to come to church that weekend. She wanted to put faith kind of in a more prominent place, certainly in her own life and the lives of those who surrounded her. So she had heard about the gathering, decided to come that weekend. That just happened to be a weekend that my sermon was all about living in trust and not fear. And I remember because Sandy came immediately up to me. We got to meet one another. And over the course of the next few weeks, I got to know Sandy well. Sandy and Rick did not miss a weekend for a long time. And we soon got to be friends. I knew I loved Sandy because she embodied 2 things that I really appreciate about people. First, she had a profound sense of faith. I mean, I could see it immediately. I told her daughters this, that I get to meet a lot of people, do a lot of funerals, but you get a sense of when somebody has a deep and profound sense of faith. I got that sense immediately. And the second reason I knew that I would love her is she wasn't weird. I mean, she wasn't like a weird Christian, you know? Some people who have a lot of faith are just sort of weird, you know what I mean? You know, and they're out there and we can't really identify with them. But not Sandy. Like, she actually got it. She was not only faithful, but she was cool. And she was real. And she didn't sugarcoat. And I knew for those two reasons, she wouldn't just be a parishioner, but a friend. As we gathered to prepare for this day, we just asked, as I always do, what words characterize or summarize Sandy? And these were some of the words that we named when it came to Sandy. At first, she was a playmate to her sisters. Her sisters talked about that. She was a cheerleader in high school, which I actually think was prophetic, right? Because she would become a cheerleader in life for so many of us, didn't she? Some of the words that we associated with her were stubborn and strong-willed. By the way, those were the first two names. Stubborn, strong-willed. Not loving, stubborn, strong-willed. A collector of people. Passionate. God-loving. Laughing. Forgiving. Intelligent. Intuitive. Relentless. A matriarch. Welcoming. Loved entertainment and having family around. And a type A personality, which I will talk about in a minute. But there are a couple of stories that, for me, summed up my experience of Sandy, and see if you can relate to these. The first one is, here at the church, we have this habit that when new people come to the church, we host something called Coffee with Matt. I'm Matt, And in the beginning of the church, we used to try to meet one-on-one with everybody who would come for coffee, and then the church started growing. We couldn't really do that anymore. So once a month or so, we'd host this coffee. We'd usually do it here in the church or somewhere else. And I invited new people to the church to come and participate in the coffee. Well, I'll never forget that Sandy heard about Coffee with Matt. She said, well, shoot, I could get a whole bunch of people from Brentwood. We could just have one Coffee with Matt in Brentwood. I can get a bunch of people there. And I looked at her and I said, okay, if you can get like 20 people there, I'll just come. You pick the place and the house, and I'll just come do Coffee with Matt with whatever crew of people you happen to assemble. Well, true to form, it was at Karen's house. Karen's here somewhere. There she is. It was at her house. So I'm not making the story up. And Sandy said, I'll get the people there. And, well, I didn't know that just in her sisters alone. There were like 10 people right there. And sisters and family alone, there were 10. And another 10, and I show up, and it was a testimony to a couple things. Sandy's enormous influence in the people who knew her and loved her. And secondly, the passion that she had in sharing what she had found in her faith with other people. She was responsible, and if we had the time to tell those stories, responsible for bringing many of you to faith, or for bringing many of you to a more profound sense of the faith that was maybe there before. As I remember gathering that night, we used to call it the Brentwood Crew. And it started with Sandy. There's a second story that I remember well about Sandy, and this speaks to her stubbornness, her type A personality, her desire to control things. These were all things that she named, by the way. But that stubbornness was not a bad thing. That stubbornness meant that she refused to see her cancer as an indictment or a sentence or something to be suffered, but rather she saw it as an opportunity to live, as a witness, an ability to impact the lives of other people, and to be quite frank with you, as sort of a kick in the ass, to get her living the life she had always wanted to live, but that we all sometimes tend to put off. I remember once sitting in her back room, the room, that's where I sat with her. This was a private conversation one day, and we were talking. And what I loved about Sandy is she didn't sugarcoat it. She had a tremendous faith. She had a courageous way of fighting. But there were times when she got upset. On this particular day, we were struggling with that desire to control, to say, this is not what I wanted out of my life. This is not the way I thought things would go. And we talked some about that. That whether it's cancer or something else, there will be a moment in all of our lives where we bump up against a reality and we recognize that we're not in control as much as we thought we were. For her, it was her cancer that reminded her of this. That's a frustrating moment, but then as soon as she would get frustrated, there her faith and her positive stubbornness would take over. And she would remind me, as much as I want to be in control, I'm grateful that I have this reminder that I'm not. That I live each day by grace. That I have to soak up every minute that's given to me. That my life will be defined not by what's wrong with me, but by the joy that is embodied in me. And in that conversation, I remember the great gift that her stubbornness really was. Together over the next few months, we forged a friendship. What was most remarkable to me in those initial months was the way her faith blew up. The tremendous perspective that she had on her life, on her cancer, on her faith, on her God, on her family, on what she wanted to stand for. At a time when many people would have just folded. At a time when a lot of us would have thrown in the towel. At a time when, for a lot of us, despair would have come to maybe define who we are. That just wasn't Sandy. In fact, her life began to be defined by an increasing joy, an increasing faithfulness, and an increasing witness to love. For all those reasons, I asked Sandy if she would be willing to share her testimony with other people. And those of you who know Sandy well know that she never sought attention for her faith, but she was open to using her story to influence the lives of others. And so here at the gathering on Easter, we gather a bunch of people together, and we get in the big room. That year was at the pageant. And I remember I was talking about how God can show up to us even in some of our darkest moments. Now, for a lot of you, you just think that's a preacher blowing smoke, that God will show up in even our darkest moments. But here's Sandy, this living embodiment, that in what could be the darkest moment in her life, God showed up in the biggest way. And did some of the most amazing work that he would ever do in her life. And so I asked Sandy to share her story. That's what she did. She did a video, we ended up polishing it up, and we shared that testimony video on Easter. But today, what I want to do is let Sandy preach to you the words that she preached to us all 5 years ago. But this one's the uncut version, the longer version. But in it, Sandy does what I usually stand up here and do. She celebrates, she acknowledges that it's hard, but ultimately she preaches to us the gospel and points us towards hope. So I invite you to, along with me, hear the gospel from someone who knew it best.